You didn't become weak because life hurt you. You became tired because you never got to stop. You kept moving because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant going back to that place your mind still treats like a crime scene. Maybe it was a betrayal that rearranged your trust, a loss that made the world feel quieter, a childhood you don't talk about because there aren't words that don't sound like exaggeration, a year you survived but never truly returned from. And somewhere along the way, you formed a conclusion that seemed logical at the time. This broke me, and now I am the aftermath. But here is the darker, stranger truth, the one nobody tells you because it's harder than comfort. Pain doesn't only destroy, pain also reveals. It reveals what you depended on. It reveals what was illusion. It reveals what in you is still alive because it still reacts. And if you learn how to work with it, carefully, honestly, without romanticizing it, your pain doesn't become your prison. It becomes your initiation. The myth of being broken. Most people don't suffer because something terrible happened. They suffer because the terrible thing became the editor of their identity. It whispers meanings into everything. I was abandoned, therefore I'm unlovable. I was humiliated, therefore I shouldn't try. I was unsafe, therefore the world is always unsafe. I failed, therefore I am a failure. But those are not facts. Those are interpretations, written by a nervous system trying to keep you alive. And survival is brilliant, but it is not always accurate. The mind is capable of building an entire philosophy out of one wound, a whole religion out of one moment. That's why healing is rarely about forgetting. It's about renegotiating what the past is allowed to mean, not erasing what happened, but refusing to let it have the final word. And if that sounds like just mindset, let's make it concrete. The body remembers through patterns. And one of the most common patterns after trauma is not drama. It's not constant crying. It's something quieter, avoidance. Avoidance and the underground life of trauma. The professional language for it is simple. Avoidance can look like staying away from reminders, places, conversations, people. Or it can be internal, avoiding thoughts, feelings, memories. And here's what makes avoidance so seductive. It works, at first. It lowers the temperature. It makes you functional. It keeps you employed. It keeps you social enough to not raise questions. But avoidance also shrinks your life, inch by inch, until your world is built around what you can't face. This is why "I'm fine" can be true and still incomplete. Because control is not always healing. Sometimes control is containment, and containment has a cost. When your system constantly suppresses what it feels, it can blunt not just pain, but joy, closeness, desire, spontaneity. Psychologists have studied suppression as a specific strategy, consciously inhibiting emotional expression while emotionally aroused, and measuring its physiological and subjective effects. In other words, your strength can be real effort with real bodily consequences. So if you became emotionally numb, tense, hyper-controlled, that doesn't mean you are defective. It may mean your body chose the best option it had at the time. But what protected you then may be imprisoning you now. And that's where the next concept matters, because sometimes pain doesn't only get avoided, sometimes it gets crowned. Event centrality and the danger of letting pain become destiny. There is a research-backed term for when a painful event becomes the center of your identity. Event centrality. It's the degree to which an event is experienced as a turning point, central to your life story and to who you are. This is delicate territory, so listen carefully. Making an event central is not weakness. It's often the mind's attempt to create coherence after chaos. Sometimes the psyche says, if I can explain everything through this one event, I will never be surprised again. But centrality has an edge, because if the event becomes the main chapter, Every new moment must serve that chapter. You interpret love through the trauma. You interpret risk through the trauma. You interpret your potential through the trauma. And gradually you stop asking, "Who am I becoming?" You start repeating, "This is what happened." The research literature shows event centrality is meaningfully associated with post-traumatic stress symptoms across contexts. That doesn't mean stop thinking about it. It means how you store the event inside your narrative matters. So the question is not, how do I delete the past? The question is, how do I place it correctly so it becomes part of the story without becoming the author? To answer that, we step into philosophy, not as decoration, but as a tool. And we start with a sentence that has been turned into a meme, but was originally written like a blade. Nietzsche and the First Fire. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." But he didn't write it as comfort. He wrote it inside a sequence of maxims and missiles, short strikes meant to provoke a transformation of values. And if we translate the line into something more honest, it sounds like this: if you survived, you now have raw material. But raw material is not the same as a finished weapon. Survival alone doesn't automatically make you wiser. Sometimes it makes you vigilant. Sometimes it makes you bitter. Sometimes it makes you exhausted. Strength is not what pain does to you. Strength is what you learn to build with what remains. And Nietzsche offers a name for the highest form of that building: Amor Fati. Not accept your fate, not cope with your fate. In Ecce Homo, he calls it a formula for greatness, describing a stance where one wishes nothing to be different, past or future, and where necessity is not only born, but loved. Now, be careful. This is not a command to love abuse. It's not a command to excuse someone who harmed you. It's not an instruction to romanticize suffering. It's something subtler and more dangerous. It's the refusal to keep bleeding energy into fighting the unchangeable past. Because resentment is a second injury, added on top of the first. Amor Fati is not, "the wound was good." Amor Fati is, "the wound is real, and I will not let it own my future." And Nietzsche goes further, to a thought experiment that functions like an X-ray of the soul. The heaviest weight and the test of recurrence. In The Joyful Wisdom, Nietzsche asks you to imagine the heaviest burden. A demon comes to you in your loneliest loneliness and tells you your life will repeat, every pain, every joy, again and again. Your first reaction matters. Do you curse it? Do you collapse? Do you beg for a different past? Or do you reach a point where you can say, without pretending it was easy, "Yes, even this"? The power of the thought experiment is psychological. If you cannot bear the idea of recurrence, it doesn't mean you're failing. It means there are parts of your life you still experience as pure waste, pain with no meaning, no integration, no metabolized lesson. And Nietzsche's invitation is ruthless. Not make your life perfect, but make your life yours. So yours that even the darkest chapters become necessary ingredients in the person you forged. This is where many people misunderstand him. They think affirmation means smiling at everything. But affirmation can be grim. Affirmation can be a clenched jaw and a quiet decision. I will not be defined by what happened. I will be defined by what I become. And this is exactly where another voice enters, one that is often mixed up with Nietzsche online, but deserves his own name. Frankl in Meaning That Doesn't Lie. There's a line that circulates everywhere. To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. It is commonly attributed to Nietzsche on quote pages, but it appears in editions of Man's Search for Meaning, written in the orbit of Gordon Allport's framing of Viktor Frankl's ideas. Frankl's contribution is not, think positive. It's harsher than that. It's an insistence that meaning-making is not a luxury. It's often what keeps a human being from disintegrating. Modern psychological research treats meaning-making as a genuine process, not just a slogan. Crystal Park's integrative review describes how people try to reconcile stressful events with global beliefs and goals, and how this meaning-making relates to adjustment. So if Nietzsche sounds like fire, Frankl sounds like a lantern, not denying darkness, but refusing to let darkness be meaningless. And if we merge these two responsibly, we get a powerful frame. Nietzsche, stop negotiating with the past, transform your stance. Frankl, find or create meaning that is honest enough to carry the weight. But philosophy alone isn't enough, because the nervous system doesn't change through ideas only. It changes through experience, integration, and, sometimes, help. Which brings us to the final, practical movement: how to enter the forge without re-traumatizing yourself. Shadow integration, PTG, and evidence-based help. A Jungian would say, what you exile becomes your shadow. And the shadow doesn't disappear. It expresses itself indirectly, through triggers, defensive patterns, repeating relationships, numbness. Jungian psychology describes the shadow as the parts of the psyche that don't fit the ego's self-image. Jungian institutions describe how these disowned parts can shape how we relate to the world until they're acknowledged and integrated. But integration is not brute force. It's not throwing yourself into the memory alone at 3 a.m. It's not punishing yourself by reliving it until you go numb. Integration is a process of approaching what was avoided at a pace your system can tolerate. So you can update the story from still happening to it happened. This is where trauma science matters. Avoidance is listed as a PTSD symptom cluster for a reason. It can keep the wound unprocessed, even when you're high-functioning on the outside. And if your pain has become central to your identity, event centrality, then part of recovery can involve relocating the event in the larger narrative, so your life becomes more than the worst chapter. Now, a word about growth. Post-traumatic growth is described as positive change that can emerge from the struggle with adversity. Changes in priorities, relationships, appreciation of life, and perceived strength. But it is not guaranteed, and it can coexist with real distress. Growth does not mean the trauma was worth it. Growth means you refuse to let it be only destruction. So what do you do, practically? Start with 3 moves, done gently. First, name the strategy your system chose. Was it avoidance, suppression, over-control, people-pleasing, isolation? Call it what it is, without shame. It was protection. Second, choose one safe act of approach, a paragraph in a journal, a conversation with a trustworthy person, a therapy consult, a body-based grounding practice before you open the memory. Third, get support if the symptoms are severe. This is not weakness, this is intelligence. Multiple authoritative guidelines recognize effective PTSD interventions. The ISTSS guidelines strongly recommend several trauma-focused therapies, including trauma-focused CBT variants and EMDR for adults with PTSD. WHO lists trauma-focused CBT and EMDR among psychological interventions, and NICE guidance similarly includes trauma-focused CBT and EMDR options. You don't need to do this alone to prove you're strong. Real strength is choosing what works. And then there's the final act, the one that turns pain into power in the most Neuromystique sense. You don't just heal, you reauthor. You reauthor the meaning. You reauthor the placement of the event in the story. You reauthor the standards you live by because you learned, through fire, what matters. One day, you will realize something terrifying. Not that the pain is gone, but that the pain has stopped being the ruler. That it's no longer the invisible hand on your steering wheel. You will still remember, but the memory will feel like a scar, not an ongoing attack. A mark of what happened, and proof that you lived through it without allowing it to erase you. And maybe, quietly, you will approach Nietzsche's forbidden stance. Not because you love what happened, but because you will love who you became when it didn't get to finish you. Not a louder person, a deeper one. So here is your question, simple and unforgiving. If your life had to repeat, would you still choose to become yourself? And if the answer is not yet, good. That means your story is still being written, which means your pain is still raw material, not a verdict. If this video spoke to something in you, subscribe to Neuromystique. And in the comments, if you're willing, answer this. What did your pain teach you that comfort never could? And if you want the next step, watch the next episode. Because this isn't about getting over it. This is about becoming the kind of person who can carry the truth without collapsing under it.